Well, good evening, class. I am coming to you from my home this time. Hopefully the audio seems a little bit better in here than it would in the classroom. Wanted to make sure that we got a chance to upload this. This is Class 2, Christian Integrity and Work Ethic is going to be the topic. You should have already gotten your second or your first assignment done that corresponds to Christian integrity and work ethic. You should have already read the chapter. You should have watched a couple of videos or read an article, watched a video, and then read some scriptures that correspond to this particular class. We're going to do some review time. We're going to have some conversation around what I think is relevant about this particular topic in you guys' own life and as it relates to student success as a whole. Part of being a successful human being is understanding just honestly what God calls you to. And so that's what we're going to cover today is Christian integrity and work ethic. And just to kind of dive right in, one of the things that I wanted to chat with you guys about is that, our chapter talked about being proactive. And I think ultimately what you can look at in that chapter and what you can see through the reading today is just this idea of being proactive versus reactive. Really, ultimately, to me, and how I interpret that comes down to, are you a victim or are you an overcomer? And I think that this is something that we really don't talk enough about in our culture. This is something that we see a lot of in the media. They kind of almost encourage you to be just a victim in your life. Hey, the economy's terrible. The right political party isn't in action right now or isn't in office. My apologies. And so ultimately, I think that what that chapter really helped me understand and helped to communicate to you guys is just that you have a choice in your life whether or not you want to be a victim or if you want to be an overcomer. If I talk to everybody who has ever lived, I guarantee you, even if they came from extreme wealth, they were born with a silver spoon in their mouth, they had great parents, etc., somebody along the way could say, you know what, this is the reason why I wasn't successful or I can't be successful or whatever have you. And, I'm not going to tell you that the deck isn't stacked against people more than, some other people or anything like that. But what I am going to tell you is that in your life, you have a choice. And that's really what I wanted to communicate through the reading of this chapter is that you ultimately have a choice. You ultimately have a choice to be successful in your life, to do God's calling in your life, or you have a choice that you can ignore the voice of God, that you can ignore what He calls you to. You can use whatever you might have as an excuse, regardless of whether you are born in a poor family, born in a rich family. Your parents were great, your parents weren't great. You grew up around drugs or alcohol in excess, or maybe perhaps not. Ultimately, reality is that no matter what your situations, that you've got a choice to be a victim or an overcomer in your life. And I think that if I can encourage you today, it would be with the idea that you need to be an overcomer. So one of the things that there was a lot of verses that I assigned in this particular lesson. And one of the things that I just wanted to hit on one of them in this evening's class. And I think that it bears a specific amount of relevancy to all of our lives. And I think it goes to communicate, I guess, just an overarching theme of what I was trying to accomplish with this assignment. And that's the verse in Colossians. The verse in Colossians is very interesting to me. I'm going to read it out to you. I'm going to start actually in verse 22. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward, it is the Lord Christ you are serving. Man, I think that should be something that you should notice and you really should take stock in. Again, I hope that this lesson really comes off as an encouragement to you. It's interesting because what we hear from this verse oftentimes is, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. We hear that. But what we don't hear is the context of the verse oftentimes, which is in verse 22, where he's talking to slaves. I think that in all of our lives, very few, if any of us, have ever experienced something as difficult and traumatic as being a slave. Literally being owned by another human being, being property. That these people were ultimately working for nothing. That they were seen as almost animals to these slave owners. And ultimately, I think that it's very interesting that you can read this verse and you can say that God calls even a slave to work as hard as they can and with as much integrity as they can, right? That it'd be easy as a slave to work only when your master was watching you like a hawk, only when you weren't going to be beat as a result of not working hard enough. No, what God calls you to is a level of excellence regardless of whatever your situation is. And that is just absolutely, when you really think about the implications of that verse, I think it's truly baffling, right? That God says no matter what your situation and no matter how difficult it is, that you are to work to the best of your ability, and not just when people are looking and watching and either trying to give you favor or not. God says do everything in this work and everything that you do, that you need to work with integrity and you need to work hard. And I think that is convicting for me so often, because it's so easy for us in our lives to think, well, am I really getting anything out of this? Am I really going anywhere? Is there any reason why I'm working this, perhaps dead-end job while I'm going to college so that I can get my, my real job, my adult job, my degree, or whatever it is? And we look at those types of situations, and what God would call me to and what God would call us to is work at everything that you do with a high level of integrity and a high work ethic. And I just think that is just absolutely convicting for me in my life. And, I think that it ultimately, the reason why I also wanted to look at the kind of idea between being proactive and being reactive is just, if you think about it, it's very interesting, because if anybody has an excuse not to work hard, not to work with integrity, to kind of skirt the line, to really not give it their best effort, if anybody has been given a raw deal in their life, it's a slave. It's somebody who's been purchased as a piece of property. And even in that circumstance, God calls you to your highest level of work ethic and your highest level of integrity. So if I can encourage you guys today, that whatever your situation is, be it difficult, be it easy, whether you come from a good home, a bad home, a good situation, a bad situation, whatever have you, and whatever you're coming into your time here at Gather for Him, that you have a choice in your life, and that God calls you to work with fervor and with integrity. So if I can encourage you in the rest of your year, that would be it. It's the reason why I wanted to assign this today. I think that the other thing I wanted to cover today also was this idea of your work as ministry. The mission of Gather for Him is to motivate and equip you to do work in your jobs, in your communities, and in your ministry. And whether maybe some of those might intertwine at some point, maybe your work and your ministry are the same. Maybe your ministry is going to be your full-time job. I don't know everybody's situation here, but what I would like to just talk about for a moment was when I was in college, I was kind of presented with, a difficult circumstance, in the sense that I really felt like God had given me this passion for business, this passion for entrepreneurship, for just working a normal kind of 8 to 5 type of a job, or or starting my own company, but I just felt like this flair for business in me. But then I also felt this pull towards ministry and this idea that maybe I should become a pastor. And I think that ultimately, maybe not you guys, but I was under the assumption that if I was being a real, full-blown Christian who was, really mature in my faith, that I would be going into a full-time ministry position. That's really what you did if you were serious about God and serious about the Word and what have you. It's just, and it was interesting because I still remember to this day, one of my professors at Gather for Him, well, actually a couple of them, we had a chapel that really impacted me because Dr. Poles, who you guys may not have met, you'll definitely probably have him in class if you stay through your AA here, but Dr. Poles and his name was Mike Patterson. He was a professor at the time. They got up and they talked about in chapel their experience with their careers, and they said, essentially, the long story short, I'm going to shorten an hour of chapel into 30 seconds, was that I started off thinking that maybe I needed to go into ministry, and then God brought me towards this career option, and then I did go into full-time ministry through, say, a counseling or something like that, and then maybe I was a youth pastor at some particular point, and then I in the case of Dr. Poles, was a police officer for a long period of time, and and then they talked about how in their current roles and throughout the years that God had really just brought them to the place that they were at, that God had called them. At one point, Mike Patterson was approached by somebody who was looking to start a Christian counseling center in the Tri-Cities area. And he said, "Hey, Mike, I wanted to chat with you. I'm looking for, somebody to help me start this," or something along those lines. And he said, "Here's what I'm looking for." And it was a combination of, normal business industry experience, a combination of full-time ministry in a church, along with some certifications for counseling, etc., etc. And what I remember Professor Patterson saying was that this guy, without knowing me, without having any of my backstory, essentially quoted my entire resume to me, and I knew that God had brought me through all of these things in my career and had said, "This is where you need to be right now." And he ended up taking that position, was there for a long period of time. But for me, that really impacted me because it solved this kind of an issue of, well, if I was really truly taking God seriously, then I would go into full-time ministry. It's like, no. God put a desire for business and an industry in my heart, because at some point later, at some point in the future, at some point when I was in that business, I would have the opportunity to be in full-time ministry. And so what I wanted to talk to you guys about was just this idea that, that you need to go into full-time ministry. You need to be a pastor, a youth pastor. You need to be a children's pastor, what have you. And the reality is that if you're you can serve God just as adequately in a normal 8 to 5 type of a job in business. And I think that having that mentality can really help you along the lines of saying, okay, how can I go into this job and see it as ministry, the ability to be able to look at the people around me, the people that God has put in my life in this job, how can I impact them positively for the kingdom of Christ? And man, I can tell you that from my experience in industry that, man, God has opened some pretty amazing doors for me to share my faith with people that I worked with. I think that it's been very interesting to watch as my careers develop, these opportunities that keep coming up. I actually had one today where we were talking about our faith at work, because if you work around somebody for long enough, you hear their life story, you hear who they are, and you get a sense of what they're about and their character and where they're headed, and you have a conversation about who you are and where God's taking you. And it just opens up some amazing doors to be able to do that, to be able to sit in a normal, business office and have that kind of a conversation is just amazing, to watch God unfold those situations. So if I can encourage you today, that would be another encouragement, just that, don't feel like if God has put a desire in your heart to do, to be a nurse, to be a doctor, to be, somebody who's working in a business office, to be an entrepreneur, whatever it might be, God can use that for His own glory. I think that what we need to talk about are some practical tips and tricks, just kind of as by way of closing here. And that comes with the caveat that if you are working in that kind of a business setting, my encouragement to you and really what I can stress to you is that, that your work ethic comes before your verbal witness, I would say. I don't know if that's an accurate way or a good way to communicate that, but the long story short, the way that I would like to, I guess, just flesh that out is just that, if you are known as the lazy employee, if you're known as the employee who doesn't give it your all, if you're known as the employee that everyone else has to pick up slack for, that's late all the time, that is constantly having disciplinary issues, that ultimately will just destroy your witness. That representation of Christ is so poor that you will not be able to, really just make an impact on the faith of others. To give you a brief story, I had an interesting situation at work where an individual who was working for me on a contract, he ended up walking off of a job. He was in a construction type of an opportunity. He was in project management or thereabouts, and he was having a morning meeting, and he was working a lot of hours, and he just said, "You know what? I'm done." And he walked out. And I got an angry phone call from a project executive saying, "What in the world are you doing? What's this guy doing? What's happening here?" And right after that situation happened, that individual then tried to tell his supervisors and the people that he worked with that he was a Christian and that they needed to come to Jesus, and tried to witness to them. And I remember the project executive laughing over the phone about that, just thinking it was just hilarious. Like, this person is going to walk off of a job, tell me he's going to quit with no notice, put me in a terrible business situation, and then he's going to try to tell me that I should become a Christian and go to church with him. It's like, I'm never going to go to church with him in my life. And quite frankly, I think that anybody whose faith leads them to do something like that, or he thinks that that's appropriate because of his faith, is not any faith that I want to be a part of. And ultimately, if you went to the rest of that team, they would look at that person and they would laugh at him. They would laugh at the faith, and they would laugh at just this idea that they should come to church with this person who is known for being lazy and walking off of a job. And so if I can encourage you guys again, it's just that, you need to speak with your actions before you start talking, right? That you need to be known as the hardworking employee, the employee that shows up on time, that stays to help the team, that does what it takes, maybe perhaps doesn't speak negatively about their coworkers, doesn't gossip, doesn't create extra, issues at work, that they respect their supervisors, that their supervisors love them. That's the kind of reputation that you want to build. And out of that reputation should come, hey, the reason why I work this hard, the reason why I've been this consistent, the reason why I used to not be this employee and now I am, or what have you, is just because Christ has gotten a hold of me, and Christ has called me to hire, that Christ has called me to work with integrity. He's called me to work hard at whatever it is that I'm doing. So I hope that you guys can take that away. I think that there's an interesting quote that I would like you guys to ponder. It's from St. Francis of Assisi. He said something along the lines of, when you're witnessing, occasionally you use words. It's like that your actions, and the implication of that statement, I botched it, but is that your actions should speak so much more than your words. We all know that person who talks a big game, but when it comes to follow through, that they're not there. And I think that Christ would call you to speak with your actions and your work ethic above just saying, hey, maybe you should come to church with me. So if I can end this class, and I guess in closing, I have a couple of practical tips for you guys, some things that I think that we should all consider, that we should all realize this is the kind of behavior that God calls me to. This is the kind of practical application side of this. And it's this, that, tip number one, show up on time, right? Show up on time. That, ultimately you need to realize that if you're not showing up on time, that you're being disrespectful of somebody else's time. Ultimately, another one would be, when you are at your work, you need to be continually trying to find things to do. You need to be continually trying to find, hey, I'm done with this project. What else can I do? You need to be constantly asking that question. What else can I do? How else can I help? How else can I serve this organization? How else can I serve this ministry? How else can I serve my wife, my husband, spouse, significant other, whatever it has you, your friends? What else can I do? Another one that I think is really important is keeping your commitments. Man, if I can just say that something that Christians ultimately that I've noticed are really terrible about is following through on their commitments. Man, I can't tell you how often I've created an appointment with somebody and they text me, with somebody at the church, somebody who's leading a volunteer group, whatever it is, and they say, hey, let's meet up for coffee at 10 o'clock, and 9:55 rolls around and they send me a text while I'm already there early trying to, pour into each other's lives and have a good conversation. They say, oh, I'm not going to make it. It's like, or somebody, for you as students, I think that you made a commitment that you were going to come to this school, that you were going to put your best foot forward, and that you were going to try with as much effort as that you can muster to say, you know what, God called me to this school, and that while I'm here and I made this commitment to come here, that I am going to try to work diligently at what God has put in my life. When you're at work, you need to be respectful of your supervisor, regardless of whether they deserve respect or not. Going back to the slaves idea, it's like, if God can call a slave to respect their earthly master, you can respect your terrible boss, right? That you don't have an excuse because your boss is terrible. If anybody had an excuse, it would be a slave. And that's not you. So that you can have respect for your boss, that you're not going to speak negatively of your boss or your other coworkers. You're not going to try to stir up any kinds of issues, that you're not going to have disciplinary issues, that you're not going to be, just the employee that somebody has a problem with. If I can, list these things on and on, but I think those are the ones that come most readily to my mind, and I'd be more than happy to have a further discussion about some of these things that I noticed. But in closing, just to kind of recover things, you do have an assignment due. Just want to make sure I cover this. You guys have an assignment due on Saturday at 11:59 p.m. That's going to be on class 3, which is your time management. You're going to have to do that all week, is track your time management and make sure that that's, that you take chart of everything that you've done for the week. So if you have any questions, by all means, put them on the dashboard. Again, please do not send me a message on Saturday about the assignment. Communicates to me as your professor that you just didn't care enough about this class to even look at the assignment before Saturday afternoon. So Saturday's my day off as well, so please don't message me on a Saturday. If you have questions, I'd be more than happy to address them ahead of time I'll be more than accessible, and we'll be able to work with things from there. But again, I'm accessible. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that. All right, guys, have a good night.